Welcome everybody to this week's AUGforums.com live event. We are here this week to talk about low code, no code, and kind of where the lines are when we want to cross into what I'd say quote unquote real code. So with me this week, of course, my favorite producer, Mr. Tim Rodman. Thank you for joining us, Tim. And Yuriy Zaletskyy. So for those who don't know Yuriy, and he's a shy guy, so I don't want to embarrass him too much. So he's a solution architect and technical lead at Kenzium. He's a developer MVP. So a lot of things on his credentials, and he's got an amazing blog post and a funny story. Before we get into Yuriy. And some of our tips and tricks, but I've been reading his blog before I ever met Yuriy in person, and this was last summit, and I remember coming into the summit, and I thought I saw Yuriy's name. I'm like, is this the same Yuriy? So I met him at the hackathon, and I was actually kind of like starstruck. It's like this. He's famous. He's like this. He's got all these great. I've read his blogs, used his little sample code so much. So I was kind of like a starstruck when I met you for the first time at the summit. So Yuriy's great that you can join us today. So welcome, Yuriy, to the AUGforums.com live.
Thank you for kind words. I'm very happy to join this broadcast today as well.
Thank you. So
I didn't know
go ahead.
You had such emotions when we first time met.
Yeah, I'm like, wow. I'm like, should I get him to sign an autograph or something? Should I print out a page of the blog and have him sign it? Like, what do you do? So yeah, so it was you may not realize how famous you are. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and pull up our housekeeping items? You were way better at this than I am. Last week I didn't do it justice as far as how to show this. I actually just brought up PowerPoint and kind of showed it from PowerPoint. So I'm glad you're back. So of course, we love our sponsors. We even put their logos up here for you this week, augforums.com/sponsors. Check them out. If you are in the Acumatica community and you want to find out other people in it, check out augforums.com/Rolodex. You can even add yourself so other people can find you. And of course, we also have augforums.com/podcast. So if you're into kind of a long format, my favorite producer, Tim Rodman here, he does podcasts every couple of weeks. Some great content to kind of supplement what else you're learning in other places. So some great interviews with customers, with Acumatica partners, as well as people at Acumatica. So some great stuff on the podcast. So let's get now into what we call #AcumaticaTnT. So these are tips and tricks that will blow your mind with amazing graphics. Even we spared no expense with the graphics of our dynamite here. It's very Wile E. Coyote. So
that graphic was $1. It cost me $1 on Canva.com. So I did have to pay for it.
Wow, I did not know. So thank you, sponsors, for helping us with our graphics. So the first tip and trick we'll get to here is actually from Yuriy's blog. So let's go ahead and Tim, I don't know if you can grab the URL from that and drop it into our chat. We'll kind of highlight this.
Yeah,
but it's how to make redirects in Acumatica and pop-up warnings. So, and since we have Mr. Yuriy here right now with us, Yuriy, why don't you kind of walk us through this one?
Yeah. So basically, this article speaks how to make redirect in Acumatica. Like if you want to redirect, to some page after happening some event, you can use this code snippet in order to get, for example, like this. Here we have a SO order entry, which extends SO order entry extension graph. It will create a button on your page, sales orders, which will have title learn more, as you can see in display name. And then if you add this snippet in your Acumatica instance at customization editor and publish it, you'll have a button in Acumatica in sales orders page, which will with title Learn More. And when you click on it, it will redirect to my blog.
Nice. Of course, you always can change up the snippet to go to any page, but yeah, I really liked it because it also has a pop-up warning, I believe, in case you have not saved your sales order or something, to allow you to save it. And the other nice thing I noticed about it is it opens up that page within the Acumatica window. So you still get the kind of the framework of your Acumatica instance, and then that other page embedded within that. So there could be some potential uses for that. I saw some potential if someone wanted to, instead of do wiki pages, they wanted to host their own Word documents or Google Docs, and kind of link to that as Learn More for any of their teams to kind of see some stuff. I know there's a big push to do wikis inside Acumatica to see workflows, but I could see this if you do want to do your workflow in some other medium to kind of link out to that. So it's kind of a cool way to do that. All right,
Yeah.
the next tip and trick we'll get into, and this is a great one. This is how to make a selector for CSAnswers. And don't worry, Yuriy, I won't put you on the spot to kind of explain all of these today, but Tim's going to go ahead and post the links so that everyone can kind of look at these, and we'll post that with our show notes. But as we get into today, one of the topics, or the topic for today, is kind of that line between low code versus we say real code. And this right here, this tip is a great example of that, because with your low code, you can definitely create any selectors out there. You can see what's in the, and you can then put all the potential options for that. But then someone's got to go in there and actually change up that low code if they want to extend that. And then of course there's a publishing of that. So it does, you have to down the instance. By having the CSAnswers as your source for your selector, you get to then make it dynamic. And so it's an interesting kind of take on things, because you use real code to then make it more low code. So instead of even having someone to have to go into the editor to extend a selector and add more options, they can just go into their CSAnswers, which is attributes, and you can add new items to the attributes. And so that's a kind of a great way to kind of, as I said, blur that lines, because now your users don't have to go into even any project. They can just kind of go into that attribute and add some additional answers. So we've actually used that at Expite to populate some of our selectors, where we wanted to give the power to the users to add new stuff without having to call up IT to do anything, or even have to edit a project. So there's a really powerful one that blurs those lines. The next one we're going to get into that we'll post up here is dynamically changing a selector for a given record in Grid for Acumatica. So this is one where you may have, let's say, I'm just making up a particular use case here. Let's say you want to do some kind of sort of a form, and someone picks a sport, and then they want to pick what they want to kind of what equipment they want to buy after that. It's kind of like a quick item selector. So you could have it where you have a drop down where you pick the sport, and it's soccer, and then the drop down right next to it filters out for just that equipment tied to that particular sport. So this is something where it's a dynamic selector, so we're changing the source of that second selector. And again, this is something that you're not going to be able to do with just your low code, making a selector for that, being able to have it dynamically change. So you could definitely hard code a source of a selector, but having that change based on the first selector input is something that you wouldn't be able to do with the low code pieces. So another good example from Yuriy's blog of those items that we could find day-to-day uses for, but they're not possible with the low code model.
I think it'd be really nice to have that in Report Designer, but as far as I can tell, we don't have that. It'd be nice to be able to select one thing and have it change your next option, but yeah, at least you can do it somewhere.
Yeah, you could even make a form here that open up a report and have it pass parameters. So you could have like a button on this form or something. So you have multiple selectors on the page or something, and then have a button that open a report and just pass it. Kind of make
that's a good idea.
Make your own wrapper for it.
I like that.
Yeah, I just want to extend about this part number 3. You can based this technique, it may be used for cases if you want like in row number 1 you want to select records, let's say from invoices. In row number 2 you can select records from purchase orders. So you can have in one grid 2 absolutely different entities with help of technique number 3. And this was as a result of I cannot sleepless night, but plenty of efforts spent in order to have 2 different entities in single grid.
So interesting thing in my pre-show talks with Yuriy here, Tim, you and I had also talked about this very topic about why each of you started blogging, and I was it was interesting to hear his take on things. Is that Yuriy did the same thing you did? Is that he's like, hey, I just did this thing, and I want to make my notes for it, and I don't want to forget it. So I'm going to blog about it so that next time I want to find it, I'm not having to like sift through a bunch of papers and stuff, but it's I can just Google it. Google your blog and then the keyword you're looking for, and there you go. So and I know Tim, you've done some stuff on augforums.com, kind of giving other people the ability to do that same sort of thing. Maybe you can take a minute to talk about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that, Yuriy. That's cool. A Google search, maybe it's just how our brains work to find stuff. And yeah, what Ryan's talking about is I did just add something into the forums on augforums.com where I actually review every new discussion topic that people post. And I'm now putting them in one of 2 categories. Either it's a question, which has been most of the stuff, or now the second category is it'll show up in red and it'll be the hashtag AcumaticaTnT. So if you want to just look at stuff that people are sharing rather than questions that people have, you can click on one of those red buttons and it'll show you all the hashtag AcumaticaTnT posts. Then, of course, it's just a hashtag. And the idea that we're encouraging is no matter where you post it, if you post it on your own blog or on the community.acumatica.com, social media, that's really where hashtags are used mostly. If you use that hashtag, then you're telling Google that you want to maybe search by that hashtag again in the future. So then you can search a hashtag AcumaticaTnT and some key phrase or something to help you find what you're looking for.
Okay, that's cool. I just want to say that like my first version of blog, it was much more efficient in searching. Like it was built with the usage of Lucene. Like there is kind of framework in C#, which is very close to how Google works, but it can be applicable in scope of single website. Like then I switched to new, like nice looking version of blog, but I lost that Lucene search. So now I rely solely on Google in order to search on my blog and buy some keywords.
That's funny. Google's just so good at it.
Yeah.
All right. So our last tip here, and Tim, this is from what you posted, so I'll let you kind of talk through this. This is creating harvester parameters.
Yeah, I was just doing this yesterday for a client, and I thought I might as well throw a post out there. You'll see the red hashtag AcumaticaTnT on the top. So actually, if you post anything in the forums, I review all the discussion topics, so I'll put the tag on it. You won't be able to put it on yourself. But I was working on something, and I realized you've got these different date parameters that you can use in Report Designer, like month start, month end, quarter start, quarter end. And they're great because they save you from having to write a formula to calculate that yourself. But what I found is they're only available on the parameters tab and not in the filters tab where I really needed it. So all I did is created like dummy, what I'm calling harvester parameters to grab the value from month start, quarter start, whatever it is. And then I use the harvester parameter on the filters. So it's like a little workaround to be able to use those date parameters. And I wrote up a little post about it.
And does that allow you to do like month start or month start -2 or something, where you can kind of go back 2 months from the month start?
You can, if you then use the regular date add function,
okay.
You put that around it, and you do that in the parameter, and you put it in the default value of the parameter. And then basically you're doing your math there, and then you just use the result on your filters tab. It also makes your filters tab look a little cleaner.
Nice. Yeah, I remember doing the report broadcast several weeks ago, and part of the discussions was creating parameters like that, and kind of being able to reuse them. And one of the benefits was that how it made things look very clean. All right, guys. So those are our hashtag AcumaticaTnT, our tips and tricks that'll blow your mind for the week. So thank you both, Yuriy and Tim, for kind of providing that content in your respective blogs or respective mediums for that. So now let's get into the more of the meat of things. We're going to be talking about those lines of low code versus real code. And we had Doug Johnson on a couple weeks ago talking about the low code and that being a big push for Acumatica, but there are definitely some limitations there, and they fall into several buckets. And one of them being performance. Okay, sometimes you can't get performance out of low code. You also fall under limitations, where you just can't do something. And then there's just it's there, but you can't get there. And then the last thing I want to do is kind of talk about some warnings if you kind of cross the lines between both, and what can happen if you don't realize something's been updated somewhere else. And Yuri's got a good story about many sleepless days trying to figure out something that he'll kind of give us the story at the end there. But Yuriy, you and I talked about this. And I know they talked about that when we did our workflow engine broadcast. We talked about how behind the scenes it actually does create code. And so, Yuriy, why does that make things not as efficient?
Well, general idea is like the more universal mechanism you make, the bigger it will happen. Like if you speak from computer science perspective, like the most efficient code would be assembler, but it will be like the hardest one to write. And the more you go, like more layers are added above, which shorters way to the market of anything, but you sacrifice performance. And like kind of illustration, like the more universal car you have, it's usually big it will be. Like if you need car for transporting your body from point A to point B, it can be Mini Cooper. But if you want to transport your body as well as your luggage, as well as some wood materials, you will need a lorry. And the same happens from the standpoint of coding or low code or no code. And like if you move something in Designer and pick some value, in one way or in another way, Acumatica will generate some kind of general purpose code. And the more activities you do, the more code will be generated behind the curtains. And of course, the more generic code, it will be kind of harder to make like optimizing, which will be like kind of one size fits all. It unfortunately doesn't happen.
All right. If anyone has any questions at all where we're going today, or just it can be on topic, or just you want to throw something out to Yuriy, or any of us, you can go ahead and chime in on the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those questions in real time as we go today. Now, along those same lines, something I've noticed is when I'm using just generic inquiries, and if I'm trying to, if I want to pull in attributes, I've seen where Acumatica will if I just mention the attribute, you can get to the data, but it adds the linkage in a certain way, and I'm not altogether sure if that's the most efficient way to do it versus just a join to that table, because they do an embedded select statement within your other select to hit up CSAnswers. And so I've never ran any performance monitors on that, but it's something as I was prepping for this, something I started thinking about is, okay, hey, is that really the best way? Because I know in several GIs, as you're creating it, you just mentioned, okay, attributes, and you can pull in like customer attributes or any attributes for SO order, not SO order, but customer attributes or item attributes. And I don't know, Tim or Yuriy, if you guys ever looked at the SQL that Acumatica uses when you reference attributes inside generic inquiries, and do you guys know if that's the most efficient way, or even the audience? I don't know if anyone's out there has seen it, but the way they do their select within attributes.
Well, I can tell you kind of story, like for one customer, they relied very heavily on attributes, and they put a lot of attributes for plenty of use cases. Basically, for them it was necessary to have a lot of attributes on business accounts and for customers. And then, in the end of the day, they wanted to have search by attributes happening on business accounts page. And they had, I don't remember, like around 2,000 or 3,000 attributes applicable to customers. And you understand that it was like even to make just kind of like with coding standpoint, such kind of attributes is kind of enormous. But such kind of quantity with attributes, it made this generic inquiry to open for eons of time. And what was the outcome? In the end of the day, they decided like it was necessary basically to add some indexing operations on attributes, which kind of speeded up performance of business accounts page. But it had another side effect. Each time when it was when update were made to attributes, like it's usually it was done like like if somebody wanted during the daytime, it's usually don't touch this during the daytime. Let's do it in the evening hours. And kind of story which happened with one company which.
So what was the answer?
The answer was to build indexes in scope of indexes, like plenty of indexes. I never seen so many indexes used, and then also it was made the decision that if there is a need to change some attributes, then in the end of the day, when outside of working hours, at indexes were dropped, updated, and before beginning of the day, indexes were recreated. In that way, a company gets best of two worlds. During non-working hours, when nobody from humans uses page, indexes are not needed, just updation. And then before the beginning, when company reads the data, then it was created again. It's basically kind of when, based on what is usually company do, it is possible to understand the level of maturity of the company in scope of Acumatica. Like when somebody just starts to use Acumatica, they put a lot of attention into writing the data. But when company grows more and more and more, it's usually management needs more time to reading and interpreting the data. And then it is kind of second stage. And based on conversation with any kind of company, I can understand more or less kind of level how kind of mature is the company in scope of Acumatica. If they have question, I want to read this report, I want to read that report. It means looks like you use Acumatica for 5 years. But if somebody has a question, how can I efficiently write into Acumatica? It's not always the case, it's usually just somebody just started Acumatica.
So, question on that, because as you're walking through the story, I was wondering why attributes as opposed to custom fields? Because custom fields, you're not having to do the same joins to CSAnswers to get the data. They'd already be there in the B account table.
It's usually custom fields. Like attributes are used by many tables, but custom fields, they are used in storage for single table. That's why they are more efficient than just attributes. Because if there is something like kind of general destination for everything, then just reading through that everything, it becomes kind of a problem.
Yeah, I was wondering for this customer, and if you can add any kind of context around why they chose attributes to store that data, as opposed to custom fields. I mean, there's definitely a trade-off with database size. If you use attributes, you don't have to use up space in your database for every record if it's not using the data. And was that the reason for attributes, because they had several thousand, and if you're not using them all for every record for a B account, it's wasted space, or what was the logic of attributes over custom fields?
Unfortunately, I didn't ask this question. Like, as a
Okay.
developer, I was kind of, horses have this, they want to see what's going on. And like, I was pulled like, look, this works slowly. We need to work it
faster.
And like, even if I understand why, like, of course, it's very important to ask why did you make such a decision. But at that time, it was question like how to make it faster. And after we make it faster, we can understand why some decision was made.
So on this broadcast, I'm trying to think on each one of these: low code, no code, or Yuriy developer territory. And when you say indexes, I think you're talking about database indexes. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was this customer on-prem, and that's why they were able to mess with the database indexes? Do you remember?
Basically, that customer, they are on cloud, but you can create indexes if you're on cloud.
Okay. So, and they created themselves. I guess where I'm wondering here is part of what I would consider low code, no code is if you could just make Acumatica do it for you. And I'm wondering if they just opened a support case and Acumatica created the index, or did they have to get more involved in that? Do you recall?
Basically, Acumatica created those indexes for them.
I like that. So to me, that's low code, no code, because the coding I had to do was create a support case that said, this is running slow. Could you speed it up? I like that.
Yeah. But anyway, I want to mention that you can, like there are plenty of techniques how you can apply SQL queries to your Acumatica database, even if it is in cloud. Like you can go even up to distance of stored procedures. Of course, it's not something that is recommended, because with help of stored procedures, you can kind of break license limitations sometime, which is kind of against. But you can create SQL queries and indexes in cloud instance as well. There are some ways to do this.
So you just kind of do the TSQL. And put that into your projects, I'm assuming, something like that.
Yeah, you can do this.
Okay, yeah, or Tim's idea, just create the case, and Acumatica will create the indexes for you. Either one of those work. Yeah, it's interesting with the programming before. You and I were talking about this, where a lot of design choices in the past were done because of space limitations, because they didn't have the same size of servers. Either physical servers if you're on-prem, or cloud-based where you can kind of grow it as you want to. So you make certain design decisions to normalize your data. But that's great for writing and storage, but reading it may not be the best. And something that we've had to do for some of our reads because of performance is that we will denormalize it, where we will run a SQL query, put it into a table nightly, because we don't need real-time data, and that's something that you couldn't necessarily do with the low-code piece of it, is improve that performance. So as we talk through things, okay, there's limitations, there's performance, and sometimes you've got to go to the database and do things like denormalize in order for you to get that. And I think we even talked to we had Velixo on here. They were talking about they do some of their own data storage for performance reasons. And I think you're mentioning DataSelf did the same sort of thing, where they create their own data store.
Yeah, basically Johnny Girardi, when he made the presentation of overall architecture, I like it so much that I even put some screenshots of his presentation in my blog as well. They like pull data out of Acumatica, massage it for different reports. And yeah, they have it in order to give the fastest possible reading of values from Acumatica, and that's kind of yeah.
Yeah, so for the audience out there, that's where they kind of blur the lines, where they're doing the heavy lifting to do the real code, to then give other people low code options to be able to kind of access that data. So if you can look at those two packages, of course, or kind of create your own data stores, and do something like easy as that we do, is where we have a view of data, and then nightly run that to, we delete all the records from a table and just insert from that view. And that allows us to quickly get access to the information. And the great thing with Acumatica is if you do have an outside table you've created, you can easily create DAX against that table just with a few clicks in your project, and now you now have access to that, or view, of course. So if you do happen to have an inefficient generic inquiry, you can do things like that to improve the performance by denormalizing it and putting it into a new table somehow.
Yeah, just don't forget to add IsKey attribute to generated DAC class, otherwise you will see a lot of the same records.
So you've got to define a key then.
Yeah. But like, you know, it's kind of another story when I first time created SQL view, and like I'm reading, like I'm getting like a lot of the same records. Like I look on the SQL view in database, very different. I look on DAC class, everything looks good. I look in SPX, in result of the page, the same record, like thousands the same records. Why? And then after kind of guessing, okay, IsKey should be here. After I added IsKey, the records become different. So for me, it was kind of gotcha.
Yes, we've done the same thing here. Our developer, I was talking to him, like he was banging his head, like, why? Exactly as you described. He's looking at SQL, it's nice and pretty. He's looking at Acumatica, it's all the same. Like, why are there 5 of these records here that they're all the same? And it's that IsKey variable or that property.
So creating a SQL view, I would put that in. Okay, what do we got? We got no code, low code, Yuriy developer territory. I would put that in low code myself, because for me, that's something I can do. And the line I don't cross is I don't go into Yuriy developer territory. And to me, the way I know where that line is, or how I define that line, is if I have to open up Visual Studio. That's the line that I personally do not cross. I mean, I'll go up into it, but I am not opening Visual Studio. But you know, doing a SQL view is something you can do just in the customization project.
You can do C# in the customization package without having to open up Visual Studio.
That's true. So yeah, so that's a good point. And then how would you define, Yuriy, when you're crossing that line between low code and full-blown developer territory? Yeah, especially given Ryan's point that you can still do a lot in code without opening Visual Studio.
Yeah, you know, from this standpoint, I would say for me everything's code because I can go deep enough to analyze. But regarding SQL, I want to tell you kind of story. When I used to learn computer science in university, some of teacher told us a story that SQL initially was intended as language of the business, and when it was developed, it was built on premise that any kind of executive can learn SQL and apply its knowledge in order to understand what's going on with his data. I don't know how easy it is for management to understand SQL, but honestly, I've seen plenty of cases when some CFOs, after introducing them to select statement, group by, they kind of exclaim, "Oh, it's so simple. Now I can, now I don't need you as a developer." And but overall, I would say like difference between low code or no code. As soon as you go to C#, it is code. If you go outside of C#, it is low code. And if you don't touch customization editor, it is no code. That would be how I would draw the lines.
Yeah, and then the kind of the fuzziness of that is that Acumatica does give you some tools. So if you've never added a DAC via a SQL view or SQL table to Acumatica, you may not realize this, but there's really, you go in there, you say you want to add a new DAC, you reference the table or view, and then you say and create my DAC based on SQL, and it will actually create the code for you. And it's one of those areas where it's actually pretty efficient code, where it just kind of creates all the classes for you for all the fields. But it's an easy, I mean, I mean, almost no code because you're not doing anything, but you do access the project to do that, and the result of it is code. And it may be scary the first time, but after that, it's pretty straightforward to kind of do that. So if any of the audience has not done that, it's a pretty easy way to kind of add links to if you've done any kind of outside tables. And a good trick, as far as the tip and trick goes, if you're migrating from another package to Acumatica, a great way for you to get access to your old data is just dump it into a SQL table, and then create a DAC for that in Acumatica, and you can create GIs, you can create any of that you want to based off that data, and then you have your old data, but it's in Acumatica. It may not be in the exact format, but for a lot of people, you just need to see it. And so we wanted to be able to see old quotes and orders and what was on those. So we just pulled over those from our Everest days and put that into tables within Acumatica and created the DAX. And now, if anytime anyone has a question about something old, they can just kind of look it up in our GIs we've created based off of that. So it's a nice little kind of trick, kind of talking about that blur of low code, no code. You're kind of using their engine to create the DAX for you, and then you're creating the no code GIs off that.
So Yuriy, I like your point about you open the customization editor, now you're into code, right? But then to Ryan's point, Acumatica, like in the SQL View example, will generate the code for you. And you can still go in and like change the display names of the fields, things like that. So maybe one way of defining it, what do you guys think about this? What if we say low code is I write less than 5 lines of code? Maybe it comes down to lines. Whereas like, with Ryan's example, it might generate 50 lines of code and I can change some display values, but I didn't have to create those. I didn't have to know the names of the whatever formulas or whatever they're called in C#. It created it for me. But if I actually had to write some lines, I still might consider that low code. Like if I need to create a selector, maybe I would consider that low code because it's like 2-3 lines of code. And I might need to be aware of some, just like Excel functions, some certain basic things that I can use to create things in Acumatica. Maybe it comes down to lines of code, or maybe it comes down to which specific C# things are business user friendly versus, real scary developer stuff. What do you guys think?
I think it's also the person doing it, because the average user, if you said, oh yeah, just go in here and tweak a couple things, and they're like, no, that's heavy code. You're like, come on, it's obvious. Just look at an example of one of the other ones and just copy that and change a couple things, and it works. And for us, it may be, oh, that's low code. For them, it's like, oh no, I'm a developer if I can change that. So there's definitely gonna be some perception on that. I did want to get into some of the limitations, and I don't know if any of the audience out there is worked on the workflow engine and maybe able to chime in here on some pieces. But here we go. Brian's chiming in here. To me, low code is you can do it easily in the customization project directly. No code would be like automation steps in the new workflow. Yeah, even for the new workflow, I got differing results. So one of the things I wanted to test, because this happens to us all the time, is that we'll create a custom field in the detail section. So the SO order or ARTran, and we want to be able to edit that after the fact, because there's no business logic in Acumatica that controls those custom fields as far as any dependencies. And we want to be able to edit those after the fact. So it's some piece of data in there. Same sort of thing actually on SO invoice or SO order. Maybe some of the header fields we want to edit where Acumatica would traditionally lock them. So if you think about it like a released invoice, we may have a field on there where we want to put, let's say, the sales rep or something. Or if we're splitting that or giving a certain commission percentage, and accounting may want to go in there after the fact and edit some of those custom fields. And we've had to go into what we call real code to enable those fields.
I like that, real code.
Yeah.
No code, low code, and real code.
Real code. So we had to go into real code to make those changes. And the new workflow engine came out, and I've been playing around with it, trying to see, hey, can that open up those fields? Because the weird thing is with the workflow engine, it has a disabled field where you can set that to true or false, but it doesn't necessarily, if you set it to false as being not disabled, that doesn't necessarily make it enabled. Like it's not necessarily the negative of that in all cases. So I was playing with opportunities, and I was able to enable, like if I won an opportunity, I was able to use workflow and make the description enabled and source enabled, so I could change those. But if I wanted to make the description of a detail line enabled after the fact, I couldn't do that because that section was locked down. And so there's some areas that it looks like that Acumatica still is controlling some of the enablement or the locking of certain areas in their source, even though when you go to the workflow, you see that where it's actually locking that section. Like you can see like overall sections similar to business activity monitoring. You could see those sections same as in workflow engine. So I don't know if anyone in the audience or Yuriy or Tim, if you got a chance to kind of work for some of that, is in your experience, have you been able to get into it and enable fields that you previously had to go into real code to do?
Like new workflow engine.
So Tony had an issue.
Bite us.
And they want to add an option to a dropdown, and we can no longer do that in real custom code. It has to be done at least partly in workflows. Huh.
Basically,
that is surprising.
I believe this is because like workflows, they have a priority over custom code. Like, and if in custom code we set values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but workflow engine sets values 1, 2, 3, then those values 4 and 5 will be disregarded. Like they have priority. So that is kind of like this is not a bug, it's a feature. For me, I had similar story I told to Ryan. Like I get customer requests, enable some field that sets orders, and like how long it took? 3 hours. It turned out to be 3 days of activity just because like some employee via workflow engine, he disabled that field, and then after half a year he transferred to another company, and he forget, and somebody else will, oh, now we want this field to be enabled. And like enable field, like basically like 3 lines of code, out of which 2 lines will be opening bracket and closing bracket. And like edit it, field is disabled. Apply the same code, sales demo, enabled. At customer instance, disabled. Okay, what other packages can be guilty of this? Unpublish all packages, still disabled. And only after kind of research, just exported, like we found out, like exported package, look in the generate XML, and found automation step, and then in workflow automation we found out, okay, here it is. Like workflow engine makes disabling of the field, and it had priority over what we had in row selected. And once we do it from automation, we now see that we can, that our code finally start working.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this early on, is kind of what to watch out for if you start to have to blur those lines between the two. So if you if you have some code in workflow and you have some code that's not in workflow, you got to realize that. If you don't, then all of a sudden you're going to get into a point where you don't realize what's going on. Someone in the chat had mentioned something about being frustrated with enabling a field. So I wanted to, if Tim, if you can, let me see here. If you
Yeah,
can
go ahead and share.
share, yeah. There we go. So if you don't already have this, this is just ESA order row selected. And in this case, we said, hey, if row completed equals true,
can
then
you zoom, Ryan? Just do like Control++. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or slider. So yeah, so here's just under ESA order row selected. We're just saying, hey, if completed equals true, and then we just do the pxui field attribute that's set enabled, and we set the field that we need. If it's a custom field, or if it's on the actual line item itself. So we allow changing of reason codes for our purposes, for RMAs. We may not change it after the fact for our reporting. So that's why we have those opened up. For this one, we have certain other fields that we enter data into. But anyway, if you are looking for it, that's kind of how you do that.
So that's 3 lines. I'm going to go with low code because it's less than 5.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty easy to do something like that. And so we have other type of items we lock down and stuff like that as well. And you can do true or false. So you can actually disable fields that way as well, and kind of create some conditions. But I think for the disabling, they're moving that into the low code workflow engine, but they may not be doing that necessarily for the enabling part of it. And yeah, Tony threw out something.
Tony's talking about here.
Can you reference those new options in code later though when you add them in workflow? So Tony, I think you're probably talking about the drop downs. So if you add those drop downs in the workflow engine, can you reference those in your code?
Tony, do you mean if I can read in the code something which was added in Workflow Designer? I assume yes, and in that case, you can read, but you will need to read them. I would tell how I would anticipate reading that. From if I would basically check. It depends from kind of business scenario, but I would check available values, and I would check also workflow engine, what values are added there. Because workflow engine, in the end of the game, it also put its values in database. So basically, I would read values from database. Kind of work around, like sometimes it was necessary to put automation steps into customization packages. And by default, Acumatica doesn't support putting automation steps into package. But if we still wanted to imitate putting of automation steps, we basically copy-pasted, we configured automation steps and then created, imitated from Acumatica insertion of those automation steps into necessary tables. And that's something that worked for us, like for our packages. And then
That's a really good workaround.
We put values in database. During unpublish of packages, we clean database, kind of housekeeping. And the same I would do with workflow. Like if I cannot read those values in code, I would add one more if and go to workflow engine configuration tables and find it there.
I never thought of that approach to just kind of mimic the SQL side of things. And just a kind of a warning for everybody: if you do get into that, be careful with upgrades and making sure things don't change between upgrades. We actually had a partner who was doing a lot of stuff for us early on, and they did it basically exclusively through just SQL commands as opposed to doing it through the Acumatica objects. And we ended up having to have everything rewritten because it didn't upgrade well. But something like this is a lot easier compared to much more advanced customizations only being based off of that. But for anyone new, I will tell you that if you do things correctly, it is really easy to upgrade between versions. We've been very happily surprised at the lack of changes needed between versions in our customization packages, and we have a fair amount of customizations, and we expected many hours and days and weeks, if not months, of work to upgrade. And I think the first upgrade, I think it took us like 4 hours to make the modifications necessary. And one was just recompiling something in a new version, and that was all that was needed. So now for those doing automation steps, moving to workflow engine, that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be the same. If you use a lot of automation steps, be ready for a lot of workflow engine work. It's just different logic. So if anyone's doing that, take a look at the broadcast we did on workflow, because we walked through some tricks on some browsers that we built to kind of see what was changed and kind of some basics for that. And so we've talked about some of the performance issues and some of the limitations, kind of where workflow kind of stops. Yuriy, are there any other areas that you see kind of where there's a clear line between things that just can't be done in the low code model? You'd mentioned an integration, kind of. I like to do the poor man's integration, where I'll just use an import scenario and kind of grab data from somewhere, as opposed to kind of writing stuff from an API. But it's not as efficient. So it kind of falls into the performance isn't there. But are there other areas that you see where you really need to kind of get into real code?
It's usually like poor integration. Like maybe potentially it's a good question why there is, like, is it really like poor? Like, is it necessary to make like poor man integration? Maybe it's better to make some kind of investment and save money on like the long run. But I want to tell specific scenario for one company which had a monthly turnover $500 million. Well, at least according to what I see on IPO for that company. And that particular company, they had a pretty big amount of sales happening. Pretty big, it means like monthly on average, they have around 150 to 100 sales orders created. So you can imagine this scope. And initially, they thought about going with API, but API didn't work for them. And it was necessary to split chunk of data into smaller chunks and put loading on one process, like one core of processor work with this chunk importing into Acumatica. This processor will work with this chunk of data importing into Acumatica, and some kind of plumbing code which will sync, like this package go to Acumatica, then this package goes to Acumatica, and such kind of logic, as of now at least, it is not feasible with low code or no code. Like potentially in the future it may happen, but in not nearby future. And like this coding scenario, which when we dedicated some cores to different chunks of data, it achieved we achieved for that particular customer feasibility, like when 20,000 sales orders could stream into Acumatica in 1 hour, which is kind of impressive number, I would say.
Wow, that's a really high number. So I think Tim is we were talking about how to kind of differentiate. It's not only it's the person who you're talking to, but also the scale. So if you were trying to kind of import some data, you could use the import scenario if you're only at a certain scale. But when you exceed that, you may have to go to API, to even real code, and then once you've exceeded that scale, you may have to go to kind of the Yuriy level special real code, where it's like, okay, figuring out at a much deeper level of kind of per processor coding to kind of control those threads. So it's very interesting, this topic, and we talked about this, and Yuriy gave a great story, and he kind of stole the end of the show with a story about the guy who wrote the disable and hit it with, not hit it, but he put it inside a workflow engine, then left the company, and people were scratching their heads. In the world now of there being low code and there being real code, and you have businesses going in and doing their own low code stuff, if you're a consultant brought into there, it's going to take more time to kind of dissect what's going on, because you do not have to, you not only have to look at the real code side of things, but you got to bring up all of their workflow engines and make sure they're not interfering with what you're doing. So I can see a lot of headaches as people get into this, and maybe we got the hackathon coming up here at Summit in a couple months. Maybe someone will make a project to kind of make that easier, to kind of help. Hey, if something's not working, how do I search everything? Like I just want to I want to search every possible problem, and find where something could be coming from. And version control. Very true. Oh yeah. So you have you have the no code or low code versus real code. So it's harder to do or see changes without real code. Any thoughts on version control?
Version control, you can always, like, in customization packages, you can always save your package as XML and, like, different attaching files, and compare what kind of changes happen with workflow as well. Like workflow, it will be in some of those XMLs generated. Kind of story, I would say, is usually developers attempt to completely ignore XML settings of workflow engine. I've seen plenty of stories when like 5 days of developer were lost because he was looking in SPX, developer was looking in C#, and he was completely ignorant of workflow because, like, low code, no code, what is this? Why should I look there? And only like another developer with experience. I agree with you, Tony, about XML. With this option, hard to sort through. Definitely, but still, like, this is kind of everything comes with a price. Like no code, like behind, yeah, like XML. Basically, it is also considered as language of programming, like markup language. It's his name. Like, I forget what X stands for, but ML stands for markup language.
Extensible.
Extensible markup language. So it's also, in the end of the game, it is still language of programming, although it is not imperative, like when you have sequence like this command, this command, this command, but still it is language of programming, and it is interpreted by Acumatica engine, like what should happen if we have such line of configuration or another line of configuration in XML.
To me, a lot of it comes down to collaboration, right? I mean, it's not just documentation. I think it's interesting, Yuriy, you're telling a lot of stories and how you're connecting stories to coding. And to me, that's going to be more and more relevant as we have more business users and developers both modifying Acumatica. A lot of it comes down to stories and just awareness of what they're doing, maybe not down to the code level, but just general awareness and why they're doing it, the story behind it, right? And Ryan, you brought up the hackathon. To me, that's maybe almost going to become a requirement for anyone who's getting into low code, no code, because the hackathon is just a great place to collaborate. And it's not just developers there. You've got business users. You've got, I've even noticed some people don't know anything about code at all, but it's that you're just becoming more aware of what the different sides are doing. And that communication level, I feel like, is going to become more and more important as time goes on.
The interesting thing is, I went to my first hackathon last event, where I got to scream like a little girl when I met Yuriy. I can talk the talk, and I understand code and stuff like that, but I don't generally write stuff from scratch, and so I was there much more on the business side of things, and I brought one of our developers there so we can get some exposure to the coders, and so for anyone out there, even if you have people who are just on the business side of things, as Tim was mentioning, have them go to the hackathon. You do get exposure to that, and a lot of times developers don't always get the story behind things. They'll kind of jump into it and like, oh, they're really impressed with some technologies and stuff like that. But they forget that business case. And so we definitely at the hackathons we definitely need those business people to not only bring that sense, but to also paint the picture, tell the stories about why something's needed. So Yuriy's team did win last time at the hackathon. So for those attending, he'll have like a target on him to kind of bring him down. I know Yuri's working on getting there for the hackathon. I should be there this year as well. It's a great event. If you've never attended, we've talked a little about this, but a great event, great chance to not only have fun and do stuff and learn stuff, but to kind of meet other developers that you may not have ever met face to face before, and you can kind of create that personal contact and then keep in contact even after the summit and after the hackathon. As you've seen with Yuriy and I, we've been in contact for a while now. I don't blush as much now when I talk to him, but yeah. So it looks like Brian's going to be there. Yes, documentation. Just noting, even just noting your code. I have, anytime I make edits, I'm the worst at that. Some of my other developers I have mentioned that, and I'm like, it's because when I first started, it was just me doing stuff. Why do I have to make a note of things when it's just me? I know how it's going to work. I'm never going to leave the project.
Basic idea why developers don't like, they say that code is self-documented. You just need to read. You just need to learn how to read this document.
All right. So I think with that comment about code being self-documenting is a great way to kind of end today. So as we wrap up the lines between low code and no code, the fact that code is self-documenting almost makes it low code just in that definition. Because it's already documented itself, so it's basically low code. So there we go.
You just need to read it properly. That's it.
There we go. If Yuriy, if people do want to reach out to you, what's the best way? Is it LinkedIn? Is it through your blog? Is it?
I believe LinkedIn will be number one. My blog, I'm checking messages on my blog regularly, and I do my best to respond on my blog. But honestly speaking, like right now, I have a bit hard workload on Kenzium, so maybe I will not be as fast in responding. But LinkedIn and my blog, leave a comment under any article, and I will reach back to you as soon as I hear the message.
Tim, can you grab just the blog address and post it on the screen?
Let's see.
I think it's blog.zaletskyy.com.
I'll just post it in the chat there. Okay.
I know we mentioned it a couple times in the beginning, but I want to kind of give people that want to scroll through that chat, have it at the end. Here we go.
I'll also mention, Ryan, one thing we're doing now with these more recent broadcast episodes is going back through and kind of breaking up all the little segments of different things we talk about. So you can link to just one little piece in that segment and also kind of scroll through and see what you want to jump to. And then we're creating a separate page. So like the last two episodes we did, you can now reach at augforums.com/live and the number of the episodes, 7 or 8. And if you go to just the augforums.com/live page, the previous episodes will now start linking to their own pages. And on those pages, we'll have like other additional links that we talked about. So like Yuriy, I'll put a link out to your LinkedIn profile, etc. So I just want to mention that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Yuriy, for joining us today. We've had a great kind of conversation about blurring those lines and kind of hearing some of the stories you've had about the trials and tribulations of the developers world and their self-documenting code. Thank you, Tim, of course, for joining us. And guys and gals, the next week for the broadcast, I'm way unprepared. I should probably know my next broadcast. I believe, Tim, is that the one that with you? Are you
2
doing
weeks.
Power BI in 2 weeks?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
June
2
10th.
weeks.
June 10th, we'll just be talking Power BI inside of Excel. So not, yeah, just inside of Excel.
So yeah, for all those Power BI fans, we kind of talk about reporting and stuff. Kind of circle back to that. Attend in 2 weeks. We're doing it with Tim when we're talking Power BI and kind of what you can do with Excel that you already have. So thank you again, Yuriy, Tim, for joining us. Thank you, audience, for participating. Enjoy your Memorial Day, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Bye.